Are you looking to read more historical fiction that is grounded in biblical truth? Then I have some book recommendations for you. Today I'm going to share my top 5 Christian historical fiction series. Welcome to Caleb's Bookshelf. Now, I will admit that historical fiction is not my genre of choice. I more prefer Christian fantasy over historical fiction. However, there are some fantastic series and books that are historical fiction that are profound and deep and engaging and intense that I'm so excited to share with you guys today. First up on the list, we have the Jesus Chronicles by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. You might recognize those names. These are the authors of the Left Behind series, a very famous Christian series about the Day of the Lord and the Apocalypse. Jerry B. Jenkins is also the father of Dallas Jenkins, who you might recognize as the producer of the Chosen TV show, which I do highly recommend. But this is a less known series by them that chronicles the writers of the Gospels. So you have one for John, you have one for Luke, you have one for Mark, and you have one for Matthew. What this series does well at is exploring the Gospels from different lenses and from the different perspectives of these characters. Exploring the backstory while rooting it in the biblical truth is done very well. And I think that overall, this series does a good job at keeping the reader engaged, even though it is mostly just relaying the information that we find in the Gospels themselves. Some of the specific details that we have, like having Luke and Paul meet when they're younger, and then have them meet a few times later, or having Matthew's brother be one of the children killed by Herod when he was trying to kill all the children under 2 at the very beginning of the Gospels. These extra biblical choices are done very well and keep the story engaging and interesting. If you're looking for a good historical fiction series over the Gospels and the life of Jesus and the disciples, then this is one for you. Next up, also within the lens of biblical times, we have The Sons of Encouragement. This is a collection of novellas by Francine Rivers. We have different stories of different men in the Bible that are often overlooked, but were hugely important and made a profound impact, even if they're not the big recognizable names like David or Moses. So in this collection of stories, we have Aaron, who is Moses' brother, Caleb, who I got my namesake from, Jonathan, who was David's friend and the son of King Saul, Amos, who was one of the prophets, and Silas, who was a scribe. This story is done very well, and it was very clear that Francine Rivers heavily researched the characters and the time period to create a comprehensive world around these characters. So if you're looking to explore some of the people that aren't often talked about from the Bible, this might be the book for you. Next up, we have another novel by Francine Rivers, but this one is stepping away from the 1st century and before time period and into the 1850s. And this is the very famous Francine Rivers novel, Redeeming Love. Redeeming Love is set during the California Gold Rush, and in it we have the story of the prophet Hosea, but set in slightly more modern times. This is a deeply rich and emotional and raw and sometimes very graphic novel. If you're looking for a lighthearted, easy-to-read novel, this is not the one for you. However, if you're looking for one that is profound and complex and even sometimes difficult to get through, but in a good way, then you might want to check out Redeeming Love. Now, most of you have probably already heard of this novel, but if you haven't, this is certainly one to check out. They also made a movie based off of it, And I was honestly very surprised that they made a movie off of it because of some of the graphic nature of this story. Francine Rivers does not shy away from the pain and suffering and even sexual nature of taking the story of the prophet Hosea and setting it in the 1800s. I will admit that this is not necessarily my go-to type of novel to read, and so I personally am not ranking it higher on the list. However, it is a very famous and very well-written novel, and so you should check it out. Next up on the list, we have a Ted Dekker series. And yes, if you have heard of Ted Dekker, you're probably thinking, wait, isn't he the one that writes fantasy and thriller novels? Why is he writing a historical fiction novel? Don't ask me why Ted Dekker writes the novels he does. He decides to write in just about every genre you can think of, everything from horror to historical fiction to children's novels to fantasy and just about everything in between. And so, in his first foray into the historical genre, we have 8030 and 8033. This is a series that is set during the times of Jesus, but what is done very well is that instead of just making it about Jesus and his disciples or one of the main people that we see in the Gospels, this story is set around a completely separate character who is living in the Middle East at that time, but is not a Jew and is not listed in the Bible at all. So instead of having to restrict himself to the story of the Gospels, Ted Dekker can create this complex world and character and then have her interact with Jesus and with these characters. What's done well about this series is that all of Ted Dekker's works, he has created this entire complex world around the character, and it really draws you in well. What's really interesting about this is that normally he does this with fantasy or thriller, where he's creating this fictional world. However, in this case, he's doing it with history. And so he heavily researched the time period and the Arabian culture that surrounded Israel at the time. And you can tell that he spent months, if not years, researching this. And it is so well done that you can feel like you're in that time period. The story itself is done fantastically with a mixture of raw emotional scenes, complex characters, intense action scenes, deep conversations, and even some romance. Now, I will admit, I won't spoil anything, but I'm not a huge fan of how the love story was handled. So while I do love this series, I don't have it ranked super highly in my own personal ranking just because it really bothers me what was done with the characters. Now, it fits the story well, it fits the characters well, it fits the theme well, but it is unfortunate. It's sad. But don't let that dissuade you from checking out this series if you're looking for more historical fiction from the time period that is intense and gripping and a good read. For number one, we have the Mark of the Lion series by Francine Rivers. Not only is it my favorite historical fiction series, it's also my second favorite series as a whole. It takes place right after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, where the main character, this Messianic Jew, is sold into slavery in Rome, and it chronicles her story of dealing with the family that she is enslaved to. The main character, Hadassah, is so well written. So often in Christian fiction, you have a main character who is perfect. This Christian who can do no wrong and is always making the right choice. That is not relatable. It is not interesting or engaging. On the surface, that is exactly the kind of character that Hadassah is in the series. However, what is incredible is Francine takes this trope that you see in Christian fiction and makes Hadassah into an incredibly complex, interesting, and engaging character by forcing her into situations where not only does she have to grow, but those around her have to grow. The suffering that she must face is painful to read, but she as a character and all of the characters as a whole are written so well that you feel like they are a real life person and you are experiencing these events as they happen in real time. This is a incredibly well researched series, so if you're a fan of the historical genre, this is one for you. This series has a ton of action with a main character being an actual gladiator. So if you're a fan of action, this is a series for you. This has some of the most profound redemption story arcs in it that I've ever read. So if you're a fan of redemption and salvation storylines, this is a series for you. Overall, I'd highly recommend this series to just about anyone of any genre, whether you like historical fiction, romance, thriller, contemporary, whatever it might be, this has elements for everyone. And what's really profound is yes, this is a historical fiction novel, but in so many ways, she connects the culture back then in ancient Rome to our culture today. And there's so many parallels, and it's done so well that it is really convicting and almost visceral in the response that this series has on you. And that is why the Mark of the Lion series is my number one historical Christian series of all time. But all 5 of these books and series are ones that I cannot recommend to you enough. So if you're looking for a new novel, these are some that you should check out. If you have read any of these series or have another historical fiction series that you love, leave it in the comments. Let me know which ones you love and why you love them. If you've read these books, tell me what your favorite character is in each book. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, you can check out my own Christian fantasy novel, Downfall by Caleb Ward, on my website, calebwardauthor.com.